All right, if I may, I think we'll start. And this is one of those rare occasions when I think the panel is going to be daunted by its audience. There's almost as much expertise on all of this out there amongst you as there is up here on the panel, and particularly delighted to see Jan Eliasson has just joined us. And Jan, I want you to know there is a job for retired Deputy Secretary-Generals. They moderate panels like this, so don't worry about your next life. But we're going to start, before I introduce the panelists and put our first questions to them, with a little presentation, a very short one, by Nonny de la Peña, who has created an extraordinary sort of factual virtual reality access to Syria. Nonny.
Hello. So, please come down to try our Project Syria after you've seen the panel, so you can be put on scene with people there. And I'm going to show you some material because I think things that are visual will really help. I show these films because the communication, they communicate better. Sorry, I should have had this on map. This is a day of a peaceful rally that changes quite quickly. يا شعب بيدوم سآمن حنن الحرية حنن I'm going to move on to another video of the same day off of YouTube. There was a number of videos from that day. Extraordinary material, I think we would all agree, that should be seen. But as you see, it's only had 138 views on YouTube. Similarly, another day, the same day again, extraordinary material out there. 527 views. So the point is that this is a conversation that is not being heard, and it needs to get a lot louder. I know that a lot of people in this room are interested and concerned about this issue, but the goal here now is to really get more people involved. Finally, just to point out, this is a neighborhood, the refugees are not able to go back, and this is why it's so crucial that we consider how we help them. Thank you very much.
Great. Nonny, thank you. Well, we've got an extraordinary group of people up here. If anybody can tell us why the efforts to meet the humanitarian needs of the people of Syria are not succeeding, it's this group of individuals, each in their way at the coalface on this. A foreign minister of a critical neighbor, the High Commissioner for Refugees, Valerie Amos, the coordinator of the head of OCHA, the coordinator of all UN and other international assistance to Syria. Rouba, who a young Syrian living in Lebanon, doing a huge amount in the camps for Syrians who are now in exile, and Peter Maurer, the head of that extraordinary organization, the International Committee of the Red Cross. So I hope we're going to have a very frank discussion of why we're not able to do a better job to overcome this terrible situation which so many people are describing as certainly the worst crisis of its kind of this century. Worse since Rwanda, some people say, worse since Cambodia, others. The numbers are astonishing, and added to just the sheer sort of physical violence is increasingly the humanitarian violence of people denied food or medical assistance, and in that action, perhaps as many lives at risk as there have been from the violence itself. In that combination, it, I think, reminds some of us of the Democratic Republic of the Congo when it descended into civil war. But with that, if I may, Foreign Minister, I'm going to start with you because, you know, Turkey is on the edge of this, I suspect hugely frustrated at times. Why can't we do more on the humanitarian side?
Yes, that's a very important question. Of course, we can easily say that this humanitarian tragedy in Syria today is the worst after Second World War. In all the wars in Middle East in the last 60 years, there were less casualties. Even in 67 war or Lebanese war, 48-year war, Syria is the worst, except Iranian-Iraqi war. Now we have to, why we have this? One simple answer, very simple but very important. Despite of this fact that this is the biggest humanitarian tragedy, in last 3 years, there was no single UN Security Council resolution regarding humanitarian situation on the ground. There is no single binding resolution for the regime who created this humanitarian tragedy and binding for all the member countries of UN. So international community did not do necessary job for this. Yesterday, I was in Montreux. I came from Montreux to here, and in my statement, I started my statement referring to girls. One was, last week we were together with Antonio Guterres and neighboring countries' ministers in a camp in Turkey, humanitarian camp. A girl, a baby who was born one day before we arrived there. Her name is Noor. A newborn baby who doesn't know what will be her future and her generation's future. Another girl in the hospital, in the camp, her leg was amputated, 16, 17 years old girl. You have many similar cases. We have 3 categories in this humanitarian tragedy. One is refugees. Refugees are the most luckiest one, to be frank, because at least, for example, in Turkey, of course, in other countries, Jordan, Lebanon, and Iraq, they have a safe haven. In Turkey, we have 700,000 refugees, 200,000 in camps, 500,000 in cities, in almost all cities of Turkey. And Antonio was with us there. We tried to do our best to these refugees. We spent $2.5 billion US. If necessary, we will do more, because they are our brothers and sisters, regardless of their ethnic or religious background. Not important. We will do more. We have 16, 17 camps now. The camp which we went had 15,000 refugees. But they are lucky because at least they have everything. Meal, safe haven, medicine. 8,465 new babies were born in these refugee camps who do not know when they will go back home. But the second, IDPs inside Syria, the second category, they are not as lucky as the refugees because they don't know where to stay, they don't know when they will be attacked, and there is no channel for us to reach them. When we realized the refugees are increasing, we established another policy last year to send food and medicine inside Syria. We spent until now around $300 million US sending convoys inside where at least there is a security to reach them. But around 7 million IDPs, we don't know exactly the number, 2.5 million refugees. And the solution for them is humanitarian convoys and access. But for this, we need a UN Security Council resolution.
Well,
just to conclude, the worst, let me say, not luckiest, the worst group is those who are in neighborhoods where regime is implementing starvation strategy. They are not only victim of escape, but the purpose of the regime is to kill them because of the absence of food and medicine. And I am sure all of you saw the pictures, the photo evidences endorsed by international jurists and investigators. 55,000 photo evidence we have now. 11,000 people were killed by systematic torture and by starvation strategy. This is middle-age mentality. And again, I want to conclude with one thing. Despite of this, I said yesterday in Montreux, I said several times in UN Security Council meetings and in all UN forum, Valerie Amos, Antonio Guterres know, we were begging for one UN Security Council resolution. There was no single UN Security Council resolution. There was only one presidential statement which is not binding. If UN doesn't, I don't mean UN humanitarian agencies, we respect very much. They are doing excellent job. And we are grateful to Antonio Guterres being with us in camp. We are grateful to Valerie Amos and all humanitarian agencies of UN. They are doing, but without a political binding decision or resolution, they cannot do much. What we need is an urgent UN Security Council resolution binding for all the parties, regardless of their positions, for all the countries, that this starvation strategy must stop. Humanitarian convoys should, and humanitarian access must be allowed. Without that, all good intentions of UN agencies or Red Cross, Red Crescent, us as neighboring countries will not be helping much, because the tragedy is too huge to help from distance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. I'm going to jump along to the end of the line to Peter Maurer. Peter, you run the International Committee of the Red Cross, which doesn't need a Security Council resolution to act, but I suspect you're as frustrated as the Minister. Why are we not able to reach these IDPs? Why are we not able to do more for those who've fled?
Well, first and foremost, let me also say, as Ahmet Davutoglu just mentioned, I do believe that the ramification of lack of consensus in the international community for a clear humanitarian activity in Syria is the ramification in which we all operate, and which is the main political reason behind the lack of access of the humanitarian actors. I also agree with Ahmed that the besieged areas are the worst off in terms of assistance. Nevertheless, we do try from within Syria to negotiate access. We are at the present moment in a vicious circle or in a downward spiral where poor security, restrictions by the government, and lack of acceptance on some of the armed groups create a climate in which it is almost impossible to get into besieged areas. Sometimes it comes as open political objections. Sometimes it comes as bureaucratic obstacles to go into. Sometimes it comes when we have filled in 50 not verbal and 30 requests, and we have all green lights to go in. We are stopped at roadblocks, and convoys have to return. This is the reality. So at the present moment, it's difficult because we don't have access to make objective assessments. We don't have access to bring assistance according to objective assessment in those places who need it most. We don't have access to the core mandate of ICRC, which is protection of civilians and prisoners. We are not in the prisons, neither in the detention centers in Syria, despite the fact that the Syrian president has promised me more than a year ago that we would have access according to our rules as we apply them in more than 80 countries of the world. We have poor implementation of commitments from all sides in that conflict, many promises and no implementation of those promises on the ground. So it's many factors with which we are confronted. And then, of course, the problems sharpen around certain specific issues. We are able to do a great water and sanitation program in Syria, reaching all Syrians in all parts of Syria. We are still able to do a reasonable food distribution program despite all those obstacles. But at the present moment, we do not have any agreement in the dynamic of the actors on the ground and the armed actors on the ground, official as well as armed forces, with regard to medical assistance to the Syrians. And this is the time bomb which preoccupies us most. It's an epidemiological problem in terms of epidemics spreading, but it's a public health problem for Syrians and internally displaced in Syrians, and it's a time bomb for the region because viruses do not stop at borders and health issues do not stop at borders. These are just some of the elements of restrictions with which we are confronted. We will continue, and I've just been in Damascus a week ago, we will continue to try the best we can to negotiate spaces where a little bit something can trickle in, but it's terribly difficult. We have certain minimal standards that we have achieved in many other conflicts of the world. Focal points with chains of commands on both sides of military operations which would allow us to get in contact with the respective persons in charge of populations and territories. We don't have it in Syria. It's a much more complicated way on mounting an operation. So just a couple of elements.
We'll come back to elements of that. Thank you, Peter. Valerie, you just caught my eye.
I just wanted to add something to Peter. I mean, all of which I agree with. But as someone who remembers Bosnia, Rwanda, all these other conflicts where, as a world, we kept saying, never again, we're never going to allow this to happen. I am deeply frustrated, as I think all of my colleagues on the humanitarian side are, by the fact that we are in 2014, we have all this information, all of this media, we all want to put the people of Syria first, and yet you have this stasis on the political side by the international community, which is having, it's basically dragging down our work. And, despite all that data, information, everything else, the huge numbers, which people just can't grapple with when we talk about millions. I mean, all these millions represent children, they represent women, they represent men. You have got these differences, particularly on the Security Council, but across the international community globally, that is just making action almost impossible. And I find it, just as a citizen, leave aside my job, as a citizen, I find it impossible that we're in January 2014 and this is the position that we're in.
But you listen to this. Yeah. Decent, dedicated people, everybody trying to, with all their staff in the country and region, trying to do as good a job as they can, and yet being the first to acknowledge it's not good enough. What do you feel?
First of all, I want to introduce myself. My name is Rouba Mhaissen. I'm Syrian Lebanese, and I'm the founder of Sawa for Development and Aid. We've been working for 2 years with Syrian refugees in Lebanon. Well, I'm a Syrian, as I said, and I'm one among only 3 Syrians participating in the World Economic Forum. But today, I'm not representative of the Syrian youth in my country. And why do I say that? Because today, I'm not under shelling. I'm not waiting in a 2-month queue outside UNHCR door. Today, I'm not in my grave. I'm not mourning a close family member, although I lost myself a lot of family members, but I'm not in prison or in a refugee tent. Today, my stomach is full after 200 days of besieged Yarmouk camps where Palestinian Syrians are dying in hunger in 2014. In 10 or 15 years from today, if we don't collectively act upon this, and yes, we can, there will be no Syrian to sit in my place. Because the Syrians who were expected to be sitting in my place will either be suffocating, suffering from psychosocial problems, out of schooling, or simply just striving to achieve the minimum basic needs like a loaf of bread. In all honesty, it was not an easy decision for me to be sitting here when I was invited. Because when I read the question of the panel, what more can the international community do to respond to the Syrian humanitarian crisis, I thought, as if the international community has done enough. As if the international community has exhausted all their options, as if the international community is working alone and without local actors. And well, I think the answer is no. A lot is expected. The question is, what can we do? What can we start doing and how can we do it better? But today I'm here at the end of the day, and I think it's a very good opportunity for all of us to think ahead. I mean, so far, just hearing 3 of the speakers, I'm already in despair, but I'm here to give hope to this panel, because as we are all part of the problem, we're also all part of the solution, and maybe we should be forward-looking instead of just saying we can. So this is why I'll be very brief in presenting a problem and a very quick solution from a grassroots perspective, from a Syrian local perspective. The first point I want to highlight that has been highlighted by Prime Minister and also picked up by others is the importance of peace and the importance of stopping the shelling and opening safe passageways to besieged civilian places. Now, this is something that I can highlight, but that others can't because I'm not in a position where I can do something very influential about it, but others are. Well, there is no UN Security Council resolution yet. What are we all doing? Aren't we all supposed to be lobbying for one? All, and I mean all, everyone sitting here, Baroness, Amos, Mr. Guterres, and everyone sitting in this room. Aren't we all supposed to be forming some sort of civil society or international community lobbying for it? So that the solution for that will be to create a lobby group. And the World Economic Forum, I think, is an excellent platform to start such a lobby. We will not be able to lobby maybe the government straight away, but we can lobby the UN Security Council to do something about it. And so, Baroness, Mr. Guterres, and everyone on this panel, I think how many more field assessment should be done? How many times will a Syrian family answer the same questions from 10 or 20 or 100 NGOs before they receive support? How many more will their dignities be in question? You know, every time they have to answer, where are you from? Are you with or against the government? How did you leave your country, before being able to get support? Now, my second point, which I will also, so the field assessment point, I go to the UNHCR and to the UN agencies who are supposed to be doing field updates, putting them on the website all the time, and they have been doing that indeed. But why isn't it being picked up and used by other organizations? We should ask ourselves, is it an issue of visibility or of credibility when the NGOs have been repeating the same field assessments and wasting all the money and the time and the dignity of the refugees, re-repeating it? When will we be moved to implementation? Which brings me to my second point about the importance of grassroots initiatives like ours, like Sawa for Development and Aid, and like many others who have been, burgeoning now after 40 years of not being able to act. But local initiatives have been able to act now in the light of the revolutions. So we shouldn't be, we should be sitting on the table when a decision like 40% of aid is decreased because the vulnerability target group has changed. We should be sitting on the table deciding what the vulnerability criteria is, because we are on field and we are Syrians and we know what we want. Do we want to keep repeating the mistakes of development? We should be determining our own need, and we should be. So the solution for bringing the grassroots initiatives and the locals in is very simple. I mean, we've all studied it in development, but I will repeat it here. The solution is to create a platform in which grassroots and international donors will be in touch without 1,000 intermediary. I don't want to fill forms to other NGOs who will fill it to other NGOs who will fill it to other NGOs to get one food basket for one family refugee. I think this is something in the World Economic Forum we should start creating a network of grassroots actors alongside with policymakers, journalists. Everyone is welcome on this to start creating better ways of doing field assessments, better way of implementing those field assessments, and better way of getting the grassroots initiatives' voices heard. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rouba, very much. I think you've touched a chord. Antonio, I know you want to say something about the camps in the countries around Syria and how we can support that. But I'm afraid I'm an old UNHCR veteran myself. When I was a field officer in UNHCR, we would have run 1,000,000 miles away from a Security Council resolution. That wasn't in those days how it operated, because the Security Council was always too political and deadlocked. We operated under, again, international law, basic mandates. Do you think it's right to defer to the Security Council in all of this? Shouldn't we, if the Security Council won't act as humanitarians, act on our own?
Well, I think that both ways are necessary. I think there is an advocacy in relation to the Security Council or the key international actors, and I think that each one of us should be able to do in cooperation, in coordination, everything we can on the ground. And we are trying to do it. And we are risking the lives of our people to do it. We had, all of our organizations have had people that died in the line of duty in the region. But it's also important to underline that the international community has failed, in my opinion, in 3 aspects. First, in 3 years, it has failed to bring peace to Syria. Second, it has failed to create a package of confidence-building measures that both sides can respect for access to the people to be possible. And third, it has failed in showing enough solidarity with the countries that are in the front line and are receiving now, according to the government's estimates, more than 3 million people. We have here an honorable minister of Turkey, 2 honorable ministers of Jordan. Let me start by Lebanon. Lebanon has today 900,000 Syrian registered refugees. But if you count all Syrians in Lebanon, it's probably about 1/4 of the Lebanese population today. the conflict is spilling over into Iraq, into Lebanon. So it's not only a question of the enormous economic and social and demographic impact of the refugees, is the huge security impact of the Syrian crisis as a whole on the countries around. And in Lebanon, we know how fragile the political situation is and how much the spillover of the conflict is causing victims inside the country. Now, if one looks at the situation in Lebanon and compare it with the rest of the world, it would mean for Germany to receive 17 million refugees. It would mean for the US to receive 66 million refugees. It would mean for China to receive 280 million refugees. If one looks at Jordan, Jordan will probably spend in the end of 2014 the costs of the refugee presence probably $2.8 million. Turkey has already spent $2.5 million. Billion. According to the World Bank, the impact in the Lebanese economy will be about $7.5 billion in the end of the year. Now, the truth is that the international community has not been showing enough support to these countries. And they need not only the refugees themselves, not only the humanitarian agencies that need to be supported, the countries themselves in their programs, because this is no longer only a humanitarian problem for them, it's a development problem, a structural problem. They need massive financial support, but they also need a different attitude of burden sharing. It is unacceptable to see other borders closed to Syrian refugees, and some Syrians being pushed back in other borders. It's unacceptable to see a Syrian family drowning in the Mediterranean because they have no direct access to Europe, where they should be able to find safety without any problems. It is necessary for all other borders to be opened. It's necessary for an enhanced program of resettlement, humanitarian admission. It's necessary to have much more positive visa policies in relation to Syrians around the world, to have humanitarian efforts in relation to family reunification. So massive financial support, but also show the capacity to show to these countries that the refugee problem is not only a responsibility of the neighboring countries, it's a responsibility of the whole of the international community, and that even knowing that the majority will be there, all the others need to be able to share the burden.
Valerie.
Mark, can I just... I really wish it were an issue of mandates, and I really wish that there were an overarching mandate, that humanitarian mandate, human rights mandate that trumped the political. The reality is, I go and sit to negotiate, for example, with the Syrian government. They have my mandate in front of me, which says the sovereignty of the state. To get to those people who are absolutely suffering in northern Syria, across the border from Turkey, to roll the convoys over, state sovereignty. So the overarching humanitarian mandate that would allow us to do what is absolutely necessary is not there. Responsibility to protect after Rwanda, which was part of trying to create that, even that is almost impossible to implement without the agreement of the countries. The rights up front agenda, which is squarely about putting human rights in the center of what we, just as a United Nations does, really making that a reality in the countries in which we work, it's incredibly constraining. So yes, we need to move to a position where the humanitarian and human rights dimensions are the overarching dimensions that actually mean that we could take the action required. But we are not there.
Well, let me just one follow-up to that and start thinking of questions and comments, because I'm going to turn to you all shortly. One follow-up. I expected that answer, obviously. But, you know, if that's the case, and if the presidential statement, which has so many of the right words and concepts in it, is really an empty piece of paper that the Syrian government feels it can ignore, well, what's the message we should send from this session today to the negotiators of Geneva 2? Because, you know, one hears that there's a little bit of ambivalence about muddling the political with allowing people to divert it into the humanitarian. Well, I think to many of us, The political, sadly, is going to take quite a time. The humanitarian is now. It's people dying literally as we meet. Should we be sending, and is there anything we can do to make those negotiators ensure that even if they don't yet make fantastic quick progress on the political, they don't leave their talks till they've got absolutely unequivocal agreement that there will be a Security Council resolution and that the whole of the international community will support it?
There's one absolutely unambiguous message in my view, which is putting the people front and centre, because we all know war has its own logic. Both sides, the multiple sides actually in Syria, all think they can win, so nobody wants to stop. The issue of access, making sure that we are able to go wherever we wish, regardless of who actually is in control of that area. Obviously, there are security implications because you have some very extreme groups operating. But the reality is, we've worked in Somalia, we've worked in Afghanistan. I mean, I make this point all the time. You know, humanitarian work is about working in insecure environments. So let's not use the security issue as an excuse. An unambiguous and very clear message, which is that we are able to go wherever we wish, and we determine the issues around security, so we can get to those people who absolutely need our help, is the most important thing. But can I just say one other thing? I think it's really hard for us to get the messaging right, because there is so much that we have not been able to do. But I do think we have to pay tribute to those humanitarian workers. Let me talk about inside Syria. Antonio talked about what's happening outside Syria. Peter talked about inside Syria. We've got people working day in, day out. You know, the World Food Programme is feeding 3.5 million people. 10 million people able to get clean drinking water because of the work of UNICEF and others. Millions of children vaccinated against polio. We know it's not enough, but we have been able to do that. So yes, it's right to criticize us that we have not done enough, but please don't forget what we have also been able to do.
A very fair point, Valerie. Antonio.
I think that there is an appeal I would like to make. We know Security Council is always a complex thing to get a consensus in the Security Council. The world is divided. It's clear for me. But there should be a way to bring together the key stakeholders, those countries that are directly or indirectly involved in the conflict, that will not agree easily on a political solution, we know. But at least they could agree on a package of confidence-building measures in which access should be a central one, and put their influence over the parties they are supporting in order to make sure that those confidence-building measures would be, in fact, implemented. It's not enough to have a declaration, and it wouldn't probably be enough to have a Security Council resolution. I think it's important that those that are key stakeholders in this conflict come really together on these, knowing that probably they will not be able to come together on the political solution.
And can I just, it's really important that we don't just say a Security Council resolution, because if you don't have the mechanisms to implement it, it makes absolutely no difference. We have had a Security Council resolution on access to South Kordofan and Blue Nile in South Sudan for months. We're still not there because we don't have, backing it up, anything clear in that resolution as to what the sanctions would be if it doesn't happen. So not just a resolution on its own, what comes with it?
Ahmet.
UN Security Resolution creates a norm, a value. Therefore, it is a must to start. It is not everything. But I am really very frustrated. In several international political meetings, as well as fora like these, we made this appeal, not as a neighboring country suffering because of all these humanitarian issues, but also as ordinary human being. In several UN Security Council meetings, 3 UN General Assembly passed in the last 3 years. And there was a special UN Security Council meeting which we called for on refugees. Nothing serious happened. Why? Because of the difference of opinion. But this is political. In the last UN General Assembly, I met with all my colleagues of P5. I told them, the chemical weapons, resolution on chemical weapons was on the agenda, I begged them, forget your differences. Put one paragraph on this resolution on humanitarian issue. They said, they promised later we will have a stronger UN Security Council resolution, but a presidential statement came which is not binding. So there is no agreed UN norm on these. But second important issue here is global awareness. When we met with Antonio in Geneva, what we call is global awareness. Unfortunately, not only the states, but also the public opinion makers everywhere in the world. Because in Western world, in Europe, in the United States, the most important criteria is public opinion. But unfortunately, such a global awareness was not being created like what happened in Bosnia or Rwanda, and I fully agree with Sister Rouba. It is not only a matter of politics of states, but here I can appeal all of you, all those representing businessmen, associations, human rights associations, etc. We should start a campaign of global awareness, which will make pressure on political authorities. As a Minister of Foreign Affairs, I am telling you, I am ready to receive any pressure on me to do more in the name of Turkey. We are ready. Make more pressure on us. More and more pressure by civil society is needed today. Yeah. Otherwise, they are making poll, we don't want to intervene, Syria it is a mess. But this is a humanitarian issue. The photo evidences appeared 3 days ago. We didn't see any strong global response. Yeah. Seeing all these pictures. What Valerie mentioned, right, the problem of, those who are negotiating, I was there, for Syrian opposition or Syrian nation coalition, there is no problem. They want to have immediate humanitarian access everywhere. But the problem is the regime. And what is those who are supporting the regime hiding behind the concept of sovereignty of state? But the humanity is dying, they are referring to sovereignty of state. State is for human beings, not human beings are for the state. They will kill all Syrians, then still they will say state is more important than human beings. Why do we need state if there is no human being living in a country? And this should be, we have to create more pressure on all international organizations and on all governments who are claiming to defend state sovereignty of state rather than human beings on earth. Thank you.
I'm really keen to get people in, but Peter, you'd asked for the floor, and I'm going to give Rouba a last word, but both of you really quick so we can get questions.
Well, I certainly agree about the limitations of the international normative framework, from sovereignty to lack of responsibility to protect and lack of Security Council resolutions. But there is one issue which makes this conflict specific in comparison with many others, and this is the unwillingness and difficulty to negotiate practical arrangement pending consensus in the international community. We don't find practical arrangements at the present moment, despite the pressure of needs with which we are confronted, and this is particularly bad. Secondly, we have talked a lot about access, and I would like to add that for me, a correlate to access is presence. ICRC has asked for 2 years now to be able to be present in all parts of Syria within the offices of the Syrian Arab Red Crescents, but with our own international personnel. We have achieved one agreement for Aleppo, where we are present, and people with the local community and with grassroots organization can at least contribute something, and we haven't received any agreements for any other place in Syria than Aleppo.
Rouba, I'm going to put a question to you, which will throw you off probably what you want to say, but something really important which has been said here, that footage at the beginning, only 500 people had bothered to watch it. You know, you've heard it from people up here. They need to have public opinion behind them to push the Security Council to act. People need to be really angry about what's going on, in the way we all used to be really angry about Darfur or Bosnia. I still wear a little green armband which says never again, going back to Darfur and before that Bosnia. There's none of that sense of outrage in the world today about Syria. Can you say something about that? Because, you know, this is for young people everywhere, which is the other thing you're part of.
Yeah,
How
well,
do we get them to respond and support?
Well, to be honest, I haven't seen a single person who isn't outraged at what's happening in Syria. But I think these people like me can only do so much. As a grassroots initiative, I was enraged 2 years ago. I started a grassroots initiative. It's now reaching so many people. But I am not in a position of power enough to do a big change. Everyone is enraged. Everyone is getting their voices out. I disagree with you on that. But I think the people who should be doing something about it should do more effort and should put their hands in our hands into doing something. Second thing is, we should look at this issue as a long-term issue. I mean, it's very important to look at it as now, what we can do now, the food basket that we want to deliver now, but we should also be forward-looking. Two things I want to highlight here. First of all is the empowerment through education, through, it's not too soon. People are in refugee camps, out of schooling, they will be engaged in violence, they will start going, you know, it's not too soon to start this. I know they're already running sometime, but I mean, we should work into these, you know, this is a forum for businessmen. I think there's an excellent opportunity, although Lebanon is a bit, you know, a messy country, but there's a lot of opportunity to start, you know, developmental projects with the refugees. I'm locating amazing talents inside the tents, women who do amazing things, young men who have amazing potential. The second thing I want to say, and I want to keep emphasizing that point, is ownership. Ownership of grassroots organization, ownership of the locals, ownership of the Syrian people. This is something that I will keep emphasizing. You guys need the Syrians as much as they need you. We have to all work together in this. And honestly, I mean, this panel sounded to me a lot like a Christmas wish list. You know, I wish this, I wish that. I think it's time. We all know what is or what should or should not be happening. We all know what are the obstacles. But I was looking forward to this panel as a source of hope to everyone in this room that, you know, something can be done. I mean, please feel free to contact me and to start something all together. And this is a great platform to start something, to start a network for monitoring international organizations who we have to report back to them when they give us as a grassroots organization. And also, they should be also, you know, monitored by us. The beneficiaries should also be monitoring the aid that is supposed to be. You know, we hear great, you know, every time I tell a refugee, I meet a refugee, they tell me, you know, millions and billions, and it's true, I hear it on TV and everywhere, billions are being donated to Syria. Where are they going, and what can we do to better monitor this aid? What can we do to better do field assessment? What can we do to put our hands into each other's hands and turn these people into, you know, instead of just continuing with the emergency relief, which is very important, especially inside Syria. But the more important thing today is start to looking into the future, start to looking how this aid can be used to empower these people to be their own voices. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Okay, lots of questions. And I'm going to start with Annie Sparrow, who's written about Syria for the New York Review of Books. Quickly, Annie.
Thanks, Mark. My name's Dr. Annie Sparrow, and I've also worked in Afghanistan and Somalia, very difficult places, been documenting the destruction, the deliberate destruction of the healthcare system. And what we're seeing now is the outbreak of polio in a country which hadn't seen polio for 18 years. It's a very perfect indicator of the catastrophe that we are seeing, which you mentioned too. You know, the public health disaster that's a confluence of the political preferencing of vaccination for years now before the war. Let's not forget there were good reasons for a revolution in the first place. With the confluence of the war, the ruthless attacks on civilians, forcing millions to live in crowded conditions, forcing the spread of infectious disease, starting with things like measles, diarrheal disease, typhoid, and now polio, which the regime very successfully covered up for a long time until, facilitated by the Turkish government, it was brought to light, and yet still we are only told about 17 cases. There's somewhere between 80 and as many as 250. This is a radical global threat that requires a global response. It requires much more than vaccination. It requires the safe water that 4 million minimum are in need of, as documented by OCHA. It requires a massive nutritional response, because we know whether the cases that are actually admitted by the Ministry of Health in Syria, or the cases that have been confirmed through the Assistance Coalition Unit, that 35 to 40% of even these kids have been vaccinated, which shows that either they haven't been vaccinated effectively or it's very compromised by the level of malnourishment. My point being that there are massive humanitarian needs now that polio reflects, and that is required because it's only going to get worse.
Okay.
And I stop there to
Would
say
you
this.
mind, just because we give it to Ken, just as a sub, Ken, quick, you were looking, and then we'll come across the aisle.
Well, to pick up where Annie left off, I think we all recognize, the Syrian government is not dumb. They know the difference between a presidential statement and a Security Council resolution, and that's why you're not able to move around to where you need to move. So I think the real question is, how do we get a Security Council resolution? I take your point, Baroness Amos, that a resolution without enforcement is meaningless. Russia has shown it's capable of enforcing via the chemical weapons resolution. So how do we get the resolution? We actually have a window of opportunity between now and Sochi, because Putin has shown himself to care about his reputation. He doesn't want to be known as the guy who's underwriting mass murder and mass deprivation in Syria. It had ruined his Sochi party. So how do we make it happen? I'd like to know, Baroness Amos, why not every week at the Security Council stand up and say, Russia, why are you preventing this resolution? None of this vagary, the Security Council. Russia, we know who the problem is. Minister Davutoglu, why don't you get you and your colleagues to speak out and blame Russia day in and day out for blocking the resolution that would open the borders to the massive humanitarian assistance that's required. Let's put the blame where it lies.
Okay, we've got a few more, just, sir, yep.
My name is Abdul Salam Haikal, I'm a Syrian. First of all, I'd like to make sure that the proposal that Rouba made will be picked up, and she's available definitely after with her two colleagues, Bassam and Furat, the three Syrians that are representing Syrian youth at the World Economic Forum. That said, I think the humanitarian case of Syria is going to continue to snowball as long as the political stalemate is there. And I think it's a possibility that we use it as a Trojan horse to break the impasse. Otherwise, we'll find ourselves here again discussing a crisis that is even much larger. If we're seeing today symptoms of Syria fatigue in the international community with donors, with international organizations, what are going to face when the number of refugees is larger, when the number of IDPs in the country is larger, and when the money that we have collected and gathered so far are becoming diminished by the day. So I think we need to break the impasse through using the humanitarian case as a Trojan horse. Otherwise, we're going to be here again and again and again, designing a solution that is fit to the regime or that is fit to the wishes and whims of people that don't want to see a resolution, a political resolution, is not going to lead really to a sustainability of any humanitarian response that we achieve.
Great, thank you. Sir, there, yeah. No, come to you.
I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Ziad Mabsout. I'm from Lebanon. I totally agree with what has been mentioned about Lebanon, in fact, and I don't want to get in politics, but a question to the international organization. I know from my colleagues that they are quitting their jobs in the private companies to go to work for the UNHCR and all those international organizations because they give very high salaries. That's a question. Why 30 to 40% of the grants are going to salaries and administrative affairs while you have people like Rouba volunteers, and I also know many others.
Without salaries, all are volunteers.
All are volunteers without salaries. Some people can do that work for God's sake, for humanitarian sake. Why do we need to spend 40% on salaries?
I hear you.
Hello, my name is Furat Al-Hattab. I'm a Syrian activist. First of all, I want to thank you all for raising up the issue of Syria. About what we're talking about, myself, as a Syrian, I believe in empowering the Syrian people. And for that, I want to raise three points. Maybe we mentioned them. First of all, empowering the Syrian initiatives that are working on the ground because they have low cost, very low cost. They don't have the administrative costs that like the UN, with all respect to UN, but they have lower costs. They have much more effectiveness. They work faster if there's no bureaucracy. If there's a problem, they solve it once at a time. Also, you are empowering, there is a Syrian or a refugee who is helping a refugee. So you are actually putting a circle of people helping each other, getting back their dignity, and losing your dignity, it's much harder than not getting a meal per day. It's much harder, trust me. The second thing actually I want to talk about is empowering the people who are in Syria doing their work in human rights or aid. I know a lot of people from Red Cross volunteers or Red Crescent who have been killed or shot down, or they have been imprisoned doing their work, doing their humanitarian work. Maybe we need to actually give them support. I mean, they are in the field doing something. Maybe we need to, they feel that there's someone who's supporting them while they are doing what they're doing. The third thing I really want to stress out is I believe that aid is not just a meal or a food basket. It's also education. I myself, I got a scholarship from the Asfari Foundation 5 years ago, and it's to the AUB, American University of Beirut, and it actually opened a lot of doors to me. I think education for the young Syrians who do not have universities, who do not have education, is very important. I call for all the people who have the power to actually get the Syrians to study anywhere in the places in the Cairo, I don't know, in Lebanon, Turkey, Jordan, or even outside. Please empower the Syrian youth. In 3 years or 4 years, you will have someone who was part of the problem, who was a refugee. Now he's part of the solution. He's helping out his people. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right, well, listen, this was a very rich discussion. I'm going to add in, before coming back to the panel, a comment that many in this room will sympathize with, which has come in over the internet. Where are the Syrian women at the Geneva peace talks? You know, it's pretty obvious that both from the panel here and from the comments that have come in from the floor, this is an issue that women care hugely about, and I think it's one of those issues where they can't understand quite why the boys with toys, the guns, and those managing the political process just cannot allow some simple humanity to come into this and, you know, to try and save the lives of the men, women, and children who are caught up in a conflict that is not of their making. All right, please, all of you, we've got 5 minutes to go. We need to sum up at the end, not least to respect Rouba's point that this shouldn't stop in this hall today. There are many of us who are devoted to doing whatever it takes to mobilize public opinion, to take whatever it takes to force the Security Council to act. And I just want to touch on that in closing. But I can only do that if everybody could just be very quick in responding to what they've heard from the floor. Why don't I start with you?
Yes, I want to refer to the basic value of humanitarian issue in Syria: dignity, dignity, dignity. And I know many Syrian families, when they escaped, they had a very high life standard. They lost everything. In Turkey, in our camps, just 2 issues for this dignity. About the salaries, what we did when we realized that we need to establish, it is long-term crisis, schools. We established schools in all camps. Today, 30,000 at least high school students are getting education in camps, and around 10,000 preschool, including, Antonio saw, handicapped, preschool for handicapped children. What we did, we looked for the CVs of the refugees, and we hired teachers among the refugees. They are teaching, they are getting money, they are getting salary, and they are teaching Syrian children. If there is a need of Turkish teachers, we are sending them. Secondly, about even the meal, the food. At the beginning, we were giving 3 days meal ready for them. Later, we realized it is much more natural and human for their dignity if you give a check for them. They buy their materials and they cook in their container house. And for every individual, Turkish government is giving 80 Turkish lira. If they are 10 in one family, 800, which is good enough. They don't spend anything else, no electricity, no water. Clean water is everywhere. And they buy and they cook themselves. When we went there, it created a natural environment. I am not giving these examples just to praise my country, but Important thing is to act them, to behave them as your guest, and they can survive themselves. And for those who are in cities, for 500,000, all hospitals are open free of charge. When they show a certificate that they are Syrian refugee, they don't pay anything. As I am grateful to mention about polio. It is a great threat, and our Minister of Health prepared a project how to go inside. If we were given chance to go inside, hundreds of Turkish doctors, thousands of Turkish human workers will go and solve this polio problem. But because of this evil concept of sovereignty of state, we cannot go over. This is the problem. And even sometimes our Turkish students, they are saying, we need to carry a Syrian ID so that we can get free of charge health. We will do everything. But what is more needed is how to help. I don't worry about the refugees in Turkey or others, less at least, but people who are living in these besieged neighborhoods under starvation strategy. This is a crime against humanity. This is almost a Holocaust. And if we do not raise now, it will be too late tomorrow.
Right. Thank you very much, Ahmet. Literally half a sentence each, because we're right out of time.
I'm in full agreement with the accountability to the beneficiaries, and we are all involved in the project, in the empowerment of people, especially the empowerment of women, and in the need to have a greater role for local NGOs. But it's not true that any UN organization spends 40% with staff. It's not true. And what I can tell you is that my organization has, in 6 or 7 years, more than doubled its activity, tripled the activity that is done with us by local NGOs, and reduced our staff in Geneva by 30%. And all UN agencies are doing the same. So we are making a huge effort to go exactly in the line that you've pointed.
Yes, with respect to education, and in fact, that's what the whole No Lost Generation campaign is about, which is about Syria's children, and let's not lose a generation of them. 80% of our staff in Syria across all of the UN agencies are Syrians, 80%. And finally, on why don't I get up and berate Russia every week? It's naive to think it's just about Russia. I would be berating a different country every week. Russia were actually the first to try to put a humanitarian resolution to the Security Council more than 2 years ago.
Maybe I get a minute because I'm Syrian.
No,
anyway,
you don't,
there is one question and one comment that I want to make. The question is, when I studied development, there was one of the chapters in my book, it's called Your Security, Their Security. So today, polio, chemical weapons, it was a huge issue for everybody. It's their security. I wish hunger was contagious. This is all I'm going to say. Okay. The second thing is, whenever the last note I want to say is that we have to look for the long term. I don't know about the others, but I will be answering my emails. So please do get in touch. And whenever I feel despair, whenever I feel lack of hope, it is always a good idea for me to take the phone and talk to someone inside Syria, of my friends, to get hope for them. It's always a good idea for me to go inside the camps and meet one of the women who is just asking me, please, I don't want any food, just take my son to school. It is always there that we should be looking for hope. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Two elements. The Syrian conflict is definitely the one in which the Red Cross and the Red Crescent movement has lost the largest amount of volunteers since we have statistics on losing volunteers. And the core protection of our SARC volunteers is at the very forefront of our work each and every day. Second, polio is just a phenomenon of a disintegrating health system, which I consider one of the most critical aspects of the present humanitarian crisis in Syria and in the region.
Peter, thank you. Thank you all to the panel. Now look, just very quickly, what can we take out of this? First, there are no heroes. We have to do a much better job with global public opinion, even though I'm sure Rouba's right that when people are exposed to this, they're appalled. But there are NGOs in this room who, with no pride at all, say that they raised in 2 weeks for the Philippines more than they've been able to raise for 3 years for Syria. It is not cutting through. It's become a narrative of violence and conflict and no apparent heroes. The fact that it is actually a story of ordinary Syrians doing heroic things to try and save their nation, their family, their future has somehow got lost, and we've got to restore that. But second, we cannot take no from governments. I'm very much with Valerie on this. The Russians are the obvious target and they've behaved disgracefully, but they're not the only ones. There are no heroes on that Security Council when it comes to this. They keep on playing politics ahead of getting a humanitarian agreement, and we've got to challenge them on that starting this week with Geneva. And we've, as I say, we can't take no. We've got to go on pressing till we get it. And if we don't, we've got to find ways around it. I would just observe on the Security Council, at various times it's failed the world, and we've gone to the General Assembly. Valerie, your mandate, whatever that official in Syria tells you, actually in the original resolution that creates the ERC, is to the General Assembly. The man who wrote it would confirm that, I think. And, you know, there have been moments when the Security Council, which is the world's establishment at its worst in many ways, has had to be challenged by the General Assembly. We may arrive at that moment with this. But, so can I just suggest the following? Many of us want to see something coming out of this, like came out of earlier Davoses around Bosnia and other global crises. Rouba has volunteered to be the recipient of the emails. Anyone who wants to help us as we try to form something going forward, please email her, and she and I will work out how between us we can get it to the right places. There are a lot of people in this room committed to doing something. The Asfaris who are sitting here are doing a huge amount, as are so many others. Let's kind of not make this just another talkathon at Davos. Let's make it one of those sessions which Davos is brilliant at producing, where we go out of here determined to call the bluff of the politicians and the diplomats, break the deadlock, lift the siege of Syria. Thank you all very much.